Yo, what's up, Gloving Academy? Today we're going to talk about gloving and cameras. I will go over the settings and process from shooting all the way to export. This is designed specifically for traditional long format light shows, so let's get started. So what I like to shoot with is either a DSLR camera or a GoPro. You can always use your phone as well. The only thing about using your phone is that you may not get as wide of an angle utilizing things like an iPhone or an Android phone. Now the settings on all these cameras, I recommend shooting in 1920 by 1080, or if you have the option, or if you have a machine that's capable, you can do 4K video and downscale that into a 1920 timeline. I recommend shooting in 24 or 30 FPS. Now the reason why I choose either or is because 24 FPS gives you that cinematic view, while 30 is pretty traditional for media content online. You don't want to do 60 frames per second or 120 because they're typically meant for slow motion video, and what you'll actually end up seeing is a bunch of artifacting on your lights when you're shooting in these frame rates. Like for example, strobe may look more blinkier on a 60 FPS setting compared to an FPS that's either 24 or 30. Now on your DSLR, your shutter speed should always be doubled your FPS. So for example, if you're gonna shoot 24, I recommend doing 1/50th on shutter, or if you're shooting 30 FPS, I recommend doing 1/60th shutter. You might not be able to change your shutter on the GoPro, so I recommend going on auto and as well as auto ISO for the GoPro. You're gonna have to change your ISO depending on the aperture or the lighting in your room or wherever you choose to record. Typically, I like to shoot between f-stop 5.6 and adjust my ISO accordingly. I like to do the super view version of the 1920 by 1080 or 4K on the GoPro. I highly recommend getting wide view lenses from 24mm to wider. I personally use the Zeiss 18mm 2.8 and as well as a Rokinon 12mm 2.8 for my light shows. What I'm shooting this video on now is a Zeiss 18mm. As far as other equipment, I like to use a Manfrotto tripod, but really you can use any other standing desk or table as long as you have stability within your shot. As far as lighting, I really highly recommend having a light source behind you to ensure that you have a silhouette. What I like to use before in the past was an LED floodlight. I recommend getting that off Amazon. They go for super cheap. But currently I'm using the Nanolite tube lights. I don't recommend getting these lights as it's really gonna hurt your wallet. So I just switched to my Rokinon 12mm, and as you can see, I've got a super wide angle, right? I could like literally keep my arms open like this and it captures everything. I'm also about, I would say, like 2 feet in front of the camera, so there's a little bit of spacing in between. I'm not too close, but also I'm not too far like this, so I recommend it being in this distance, and as well as the camera or the lens being chest level. You know, there's gonna be a lot of trial and error trying to figure out what works best for you, so you really have to understand your camera, and you have to put in the reps giving cameras light shows. So yeah, hopefully you'll get it over time. And I want you guys to notice the camera isn't tilted, it's really balanced and it's straight. It's not in a weird angle, so make sure that your camera is balanced. Now the number one mindset to giving the camera a light show is to pretend like the camera is a person. And this is one of the biggest problems that I see a lot of glovers have, is that they're giving shows, right, and they're in their own little world here, and they're just having the camera record them. They're not utilizing the lens, they're not utilizing this depth, right? So pretend the camera is a person. Gloving is super personal, right? In real life, you have this 3D illusion when you're giving people light shows, so you have to actually emphasize more of that within this 2D space when you're recording. Another note, okay? It's okay for you to go out of frame like this when you're doing things like whips, right? It's only problematic when, let's say, you're doing your tuts or your finger tutting up here and you can't see anything. So you really have to just come down here back to the middle and really just utilize the lens as a center point. Another tip is to work the camera. Be active, okay? A lot of the times I'll see glovers stay here within this box, right? But you gotta move to the side and you gotta come closer to the lens to be interactive with the viewers online. staying here all the time really doesn't do much, right? You see how dynamic my moves closer are compared to when they're out here. Of course, there is a time and place for everything, but I think it's incredibly important, specifically for the camera, to use this depth, okay? Don't be afraid to touch your lens. A lot of the times, glovers will stay here, and this is pretty much the range that they're stuck at right here. But look at this. I'm literally touching my lens here. My finger is quite literally on the lens, so there's a level of depth there that you can work with, right? Notice how bigger the lights are when you touch the lens. There's so much room to play here, even though it may not feel like it, right? But compare this to this, right? The illusion is so much more different. What I like to imagine is a dot here, 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 here. So I'll always utilize the side and top and bottom of my lens as a reference. Like if I'm gonna be doing something like this, I'll touch the lens, come back out. So I always have a guideline to follow. So there are multiple levels of depth while giving the camera a light show, okay? There's the level of behind you where the camera can't see. There's one by your chest. There's this whole middle area, right? There's directly in front of the lens, and there's past the lens, okay? And if you're gonna go past the lens, you have to have intent, right? I think that it's perfectly fine to be able to go past this lens as long as you're utilizing it as like an illusion, right? This is something that I like to do with my own personal light shows, is I pretend like this lens is a person. I'll come to the side and I'll like mess with their perspective. Like it's as if like I'm rotating the lens, right? So you don't have to do this with just finger rolls or whips or just exactly what I did. You can do this with tech as well, right? So imagine how different that illusion is compared to just doing here, right? I'm coming to the side, and I think loss of information is a very undiscovered concept. Things like sleight of hand, we can utilize that concept by going out of frame, as well as it's presented well and it has intent. Now here are some golden rules, okay? Specifically for things like finger rolls, right? I like to keep my finger rolls, right? The most dip of my finger roll is going to be the center bottom of my lens. While I'm doing things like an upward finger roll like this, my pointers are on the top center of my lens, okay? So I am always extending, or it's like I'm giving makeup to the lens every single time, because doing your whips up here is not as dynamic or not as impactful as when I'm rotating my fingers around the whole camera. And you could do this with your phone, you could do this with the GoPro, right? As long as you have the tip be the top and peak of your roll, and the lowest dip be the bottom of your roll. Now, the biggest pearl of wisdom that I'm gonna share with you guys, okay? There's this thing that I like to call the swipe. And I want you to note that if you actually were to look at this picture right now, right? You can actually see lines of distortion on my wall, right? In reality, these lines aren't curved like that, right? The reason why this is true is because with a lot of wide angle lenses, the wider it is, the more distortion it causes, right? So I'm using specifically a fisheye, okay? So GoPros have this, DSLR have this, maybe some phones have it, I'm not sure, but it's not as prevalent. I'm sure maybe if it were a wider angle, I guess, setting on your phone, you might be able to see it. But yeah, especially for DSLR cameras or mirrorless cameras. Now, knowing this, okay, when you actually do things in gloving to the camera, your moves are distorted as well, okay? So if I'm gonna do something like this, the top of the camera is actually distorting my fingers more of a curvature, just like how you see this room, okay? So now what the swipe is, it takes advantage of that distortion and it manipulates how the move actually really looks like. This is why a lot of people say that, you know, gloving to a GoPro is like kind of like a cheat. It doesn't actually look real, but I wholeheartedly disagree with that statement, because in reality, you have this 3D layers of how you can work, and it kind of emulates reality, specifically with the fisheye, right? Compared to a phone where it's very flat, right? So really taking advantage of the sides, right? And how you move for the distortion to work well with your moves, right? So what the swipe is what I'll do is when I'm doing my connections, I'll actually swipe across the lens like this, because you're getting an emphasized connection on the camera. Like, it's really hard to explain and to really show you, but that's, you know, that's what's happening. Everything around the lens is being distorted, including me. Like, so what I'll do is I'll come and swipe against the lens, right? I'll stop, swipe against the lens, especially when you're doing tech, okay? So imagine I'm doing tech here, like this looks cool and all right, but when I swipe, you see that swipe? That looks way more dynamic, right? So it helps utilizing that Z axis, and you have that momentum to create more of a beautiful illusion while you're giving the camera a light show. So the main takeaway is utilize this depth and utilize the swipe, okay? And to really think about the camera as a person. All right, guys, so we're gonna head into editing now, okay? So I recommend going with Adobe Premiere if you have the money. However, I also recommend DaVinci Resolve, and DaVinci Resolve is free. There's a $300 version. I'm kind of in the midst of fully transitioning into DaVinci Resolve because because it is more friendly, it is free, and it just has a lot more perks that are more nicer to me, I guess, in terms of video editing. So let's head on over to DaVinci Resolve. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and open DaVinci Resolve, and what you're gonna do is you're gonna see this panel here. Here you can see all the content that I've been making throughout the whole year, and I'm just gonna go ahead and open up new project. Gonna go ahead and name this example. Go ahead and create that. Now what you're gonna wanna do is import your clips. You're gonna go File, Import Media. We're gonna go ahead and find our clip here. I shot an example earlier. I think it's called example. Here we go. And here, change project frame rate. Sure, yeah, you want your sequence to be the exact same frame rate that you shot, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and click change. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go to this timeline or edit tab. I'm gonna right click and go timelines, create new timeline. You can just name it timeline 1, and I'm gonna go ahead and drag this clip over on here to the timeline. Now what I like to do, right, is I like to look at the timeline and pretty much, you know, I like to cut the pieces out. So what you can do is pretend like this is the beginning of the light show. I'll like start here. Maybe if I want to cut there, I can go to this blade tool, cut both sides, right? And I can press plus to extend the timeline, delete those clips, move this over. I'm pressing delete there on the timeline. And you can press minus to look at more of the timeline, and then kind of just go through the light show, right? And then right as it ends, I can use the arrow key to go frame by frame, and that's when it ends. And I could also drag this just like that to end right there, right? As far as editing the look of the show, this is what I like to do. You're gonna head on over to this color panel, and here you're gonna find your color options, okay? Simply, what I like to do, just for beginners, is I like to take this lift and bring it down, right? I also like to give it a little bit of contrast up here, right? Make the shadows way more darker, so then here we have more of that, like that look, right? I like to make the gain a little bit higher and maybe bring the mids down, just so we can get this more epic look, right? So that's the very easy version, right? So this is pretty much all you need to do. Then once after you've got your light show here and you've colored it and you've made it look nice, right? You can head on over to this deliver tab. We're gonna go ahead and file. We're gonna go ahead and name this example again, MP4. And you know, you can choose the location where you want to save it. I like to save it on my desktop. And then here you have options, okay? So I like to do QuickTime, H.264, and because I shot in 4K, I can export it in 4K, or I can export it in 1920 by 1080, which I highly recommend, because trying to upload the 4K clip on, say, like Glover's Lounge is gonna take you literally like 12 plus hours. I don't recommend doing that. However, if you want to shoot 4K and upload that onto YouTube, I highly suggest that. But I mean, just going to the 1920 by 1080 and the frame rate being 24 or 23.9 is perfectly fine. And here are all the other settings here. I don't really mess around with this too often, if I'm being honest, so I'm just gonna go ahead and leave that. Then I'll go add to render queue, and then I'll make sure that this is selected, and then what I'll do is I'll render all. And yeah, that's gonna take a little bit of time, and yeah, you'll have the uploaded file, and then you should be able to upload it onto whatever platform you want. And there you go, guys. If you have any questions about camera settings or other cameras or other methods on how to record to camera, leave a comment down below, and I hope this really helps. If you're looking for whites, batteries, skins, or any other gloving accessories, I highly recommend checking glow-leds.com, and don't forget to use my code Aloha Nation for 10% off. Also, if you want to get deeper into learning more about gloving from me, I just started a Patreon. It's a subscription-based platform, and you can find it at patreon.com/glovingacademy. There you'll find weekly tutorials and get to be part of a community focused on improving each other and the art form. Here are the current Gloving Academy members. Honestly, shout out to you guys from the bottom of my heart. Just want to thank you guys so much for supporting me and supporting the channel. Keep grinding and keep on improving, and stick around for more Gloving Academy content. Peace.